I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. How do we know what it means, this phrase, healthy sex, or the related phrases, health in our sex, sex in our health? How does functional medicine illuminate this? This is a pivotally important aspect of who we are as human beings and spiritual creatures. And we couldn't be more fortunate today than to be joined by the person who has defined this in the functional medicine space, Dr. Keesha Ewers. Dr. Keesha, thanks for your time today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Dr. Downey.
I've rewritten your bio a couple of times, never at your asking. And
I look forward to hearing it.
I found that I found that happening again for me today, thinking about today's topic. So there's multiple certifications as different types of practitioner. You're a researcher, you're an author, you're a thought leader, you're defining space for women and their health and their safety and their well-being in this world. And then the thing that struck me about your bio for today is that you bring the most light with the deepest humanity to the least appreciated and least understood and most important health topics of our time. And I'd like our audience to think about, if you're thinking about where to put your bandwidth, think about Dr. Keesha, because this person has put it all together. So without further ado, this topic is so important, but it's so challenging, isn't it? Should we start out by talking about what is functional sexology and tie into it, why you were called to define this, why you were called to bring this into existence?
Yeah, so, as with everybody, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And I was having a lot of patients in my office seeking bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, which I prescribed. And when they would come in, it would often be because somebody that they knew had lost weight, had better energy, better mood, better focus, motivation, things like that. And they were coming in saying, kind of like when Harry met Sally, I want some of that. And so I would always ask questions, though, because the way that I'm sure you do too is I see everybody as an individual puzzle. There are 8.1 billion humans on the planet, and we are all different. And so the fact that we all have different fingerprints is something that we ought to value. We're not the same. So rather than just saying, okay, let's just test and see where you're at and give you what you're asking for, I always ask questions, and I want to know the narrative, and I want to know the story, and I listen very carefully to the words that are being used. And when I would ask quite simple questions like, why do you think you need to be on hormones? Like, you're here for that, can you tell me why? And I would have stories sometimes. In fact, it was more often than not. I would say it would probably be 75 to 80% of the time where the client sitting across from me would say things like, my zest for life is gone. I don't have any kind of passion. I want my old self back. That's an interesting statement because we can't go re-inhabit a cell that's already dead. We slough it off in the shower, it goes down the drain. Like, our cells are always regenerating. We do not want to go back and reoccupy old skin. And so one of the things that I'm always telling my patients is that's not possible, right? You don't really want your old self back. And in fact, one of the journeys as humans we're meant to take is to go from the innocence of infancy to the wisdom of elderhood. And so along the way, we encounter heartbreak, betrayal, trauma, and that is the yellow brick road to wisdom. And every human goes through it in that way. And so oftentimes, when I would hear, I want my old self back, I know they're referring to the libido I had when I was 20 and the body I had when I was 20, and the memory I had when I was 20. And so, what I would always help them in my questioning do is to see really what they're after and reconcile this aging process, which of course hormones can be a part of that. But what I'd often get in the narrative was a story of trauma, a story where my libido's gone. I don't really feel like having sex anymore. Oftentimes women will take this really interesting statement and put it on after that and say, my poor husband, he's so patient. And that's always an interesting one for me too. And so, I'd start talking to them again about, okay, so when's the last time you had a libido level that you were really happy with? And sometimes I get people crying, tears, saying, I've never had a libido level really. And, or my husband had an affair. I've forgiven him, but for 5 years now, I haven't really wanted to have sex with him. And so there are so many different things like I lost my job, I had a baby, my children, my last child just left for college, things that were big stressors in life that preceded the drop in sexual desire. So, I'd say, hormones aren't actually going to fix sexual desire that's never been there. And it's also not going to fix relationship problems. And so as I would start digging a little bit deeper, tears would just flow from people, including men, actually. And so this is a really interesting conundrum, I think, that men have, because their masculinity is often wound up in their erectile function and their sexual desire. Science says every 2 seconds a man has a sexual thought, and if that's not true for them, then something's wrong with them in their own minds. And maybe that used to be true and now it's not, so something's wrong. And so when I went into the science looking for answers in PubMed, where we keep our research, I wasn't finding anything back in those days to reflect what I was seeing in my office. And so I had also studied Ayurvedic medicine, which is the 10,000-year-old sister science of yoga. And one of the things that Ayurvedic medicine talks about is the fact that we're not all the same. And they have a word for life force vitality that's called ojas. I call it ojuice. And when that ojas, you're born with a certain amount, and when it's gone, you die. And it's very difficult to replenish. It's very difficult. You can't really measure it, except in the luster of your skin is the way it's talked about. Your passion for life, your mission-driven purpose, some of the things that we're talking about here. And they talk about 7 different tissue layers. And the very last one is reproductive tissue. And what they say is if you don't have proper digestion, which often in functional medicine, we'll think like on the nose digestion, that this means our stomach acid, our pancreatic enzymes, our liver, our gallbladder, our small intestine and colon, and all of that, if it's not working well together, then we don't have proper digestion. They're referring to that plus the digestion of your emotions, your feelings, your experiences, and your memories. And that proper digestion of food, memories, experiences, emotions leads to the next cellular layer that you are constantly producing. Reproductive tissue is the last one. So libido is kind of like the first thing to go offline as the body's trying to make skin, blood, plasma, your bones, your muscles, your fat layers, and it is the last thing to come back online. We don't have an equivalent, even in functional medicine and Western science, for ojas. And so I started using the word libido because I don't use it as just a sexual term. I use it as like your overall drive, motivation, and passion. How often do you get patients that come to you and say, I'm not motivated anymore, right? And that to me is libido level, because you have a choice. And a lot of Eastern philosophies will talk about this, like how to use that energy. It doesn't necessarily have to be used sexually. It can be used to write your magnum opus, to create a piece of music, to be the best, version of you, mother, father, sister, brother, like parent, whatever that is, healer that you are meant to be in the world, to really occupy your skin fully. So that became a quest for me to be able to measure, like, how do we measure that? And what I discovered in my study, I did a study called the Healing Unresolved Trauma Study, because of this question of not finding the answers in the research. I thought, well, I'm going to go back to school. And I chose sexology. And the reason I chose sexology is because of this word ojas and libido, and thinking about it as life force vitality. And, these choices, if you don't even have it, you don't have a choice about how to use it. And so I did this study because I discovered that more often than not, in the stories that I was receiving back from my patients to my queries, it was trauma. It was a story of heartbreak, betrayal, or trauma. And when I say heartbreak and betrayal, rejection, these are all lowercase t traumas. So we could just say trauma, but it kind of breaks it up a little bit so people can find themselves along the path there. And that develops when we're children. Our false self, our personality, our strategies about how we then move in the world. And it also creates our perceptual fields, our perceptual filters, how we see ourselves in the world and others. And then that creates how our nervous system is basically wired to go off when we feel that we're confronted with something that's, potentially a heartbreak, betrayal, rejection, trauma. And that may or not be an accurate depiction of where you are in the world when you're an adult. And most of the time it's not, because the false self is meant to protect the innocent psyche of the child self. When we're adults, for the most part, it's important for us to embody, like if we're crabs moving into different sizes of shells as we go along, in our evolutionary moving from one developmental state to the next. We're meant, by the time we get to wisdom, to be in what's called unitive consciousness, which less than 1% of humans ever get to. And a lot of it is because of this contracted fear of a child self that we might get hurt. And this comes out, I find, most profoundly around sex. It is one of the most vulnerable places that we ever allow ourselves to get to, is intimacy. And so this is why it seems like I've taken kind of two disparate paths that you brought together in my bio, in that recognition. I work with people with autoimmune disease, and I work with people as a functional sexologist. That's kind of a term I coined, because both of those are a place where we are feeling betrayed. Autoimmunity, betrayed by our bodies and our immune system, often because of trauma. And then also in our relationships, the same thing. We become very guarded. And, oftentimes offense is the best form of defense. So we close up before we can get hurt, thinking that's going to protect us somehow. Most of us that have been on the planet for a few decades know that's not a really great strategy. However, the child self, that was a perfect adaptive strategy for the developmental state that they were in at the time. A brain that's not fully formed till we're 26 years old. Of course, we're being governed by our reptilian brain until we're about 26. Then we have a prefrontal cortex that's fully online. Now we can go back and re-examine those meanings and beliefs we put to old memories and experiences, created what were at the time adaptive behaviors like guarding, protecting, hyper-vigilance. None of these things are great for a good sex life. And we can learn to understand that they are now maladaptive and getting in our way to true vulnerability and intimacy in relationships, and definitely interfering with, yes, your hormones, yes, your immune system, and your relationships with others. Long answer.
Say again.
I said that was a long answer to that question,
Oh,
but that's how I arrived.
wow. So good. It's so good. Our audience, who I thank for joining us, I think a significant number are going to go listen to that more than once, because the succinctness with which it lays out how this all knits together it's an invitation to compassion for ourselves. And it's an invitation for this area that can feel stuck or dissatisfying or frustrating or undermining of our self-esteem to become a beautiful or the most beautiful opportunity to see a different way of how we got here, accept and honor all the steps, and then lovingly put the package together moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, do you mind if I show a little diagram of this?
This is great. Please
Okay.
do.
All right. So I use this all the time. So this is what I was just talking about. And sometimes a picture is worth more than listening to me talk. But from innocence of infancy, right? When we're born, we move through heartbreak, betrayal, and trauma. It's the development of what's called our false self, or our ego, that so many psychologists and different thinkers have identified by these two names. And it's also our personality, our strategy to get our needs met in the world. When that strategy doesn't work, we wind up very disappointed, which can lead to resentment and bitterness. And so when our significant other doesn't buy into whatever this decided, that strategy from childhood, then we can get, resentful and bitter. And that only serves to hurt us, right? Cells that are bathed in bitterness and resentment, that's much more harmful than BPAs, molds, all the things that we talk about as external toxins. This is the worst, right? And it's manufactured here, not by corporations, and dumped in the air, the soil, the water. This is what we are actually marinating in all the time. So once we wake up to that and say, gosh, every time I'm disappointed, every time I'm upset, I'm present. That was my early 30s. I was like, gosh, every time I'm upset, I'm there. Maybe I have something to do with it.
There's a trend.
That's a really good awakening moment, right? Maybe it's not about all those other things that are going on. Maybe it's something to do with it. And so this is what I call, that moment where we get on the yellow brick road. And that's with this compassionate willingness to engage in self-confrontation and self-inquiry. That's what my study came up with, is the hurt model, healing unresolved trauma, is that if you're willing to engage in compassionate, really curiously self-confrontation, then you can move into this. And from there, as you just said, you develop compassion. It goes from here to here. And you get in touch with more of what is often talked about as your true nature, your luminous self, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, however you want to talk about it, is your consciousness, higher self. that is what you become aware is actually you, not your set of personality characteristics. And then that leads to wisdom. And the only way that we, get here and realize that we never really were disconnected from source, divine, however we want to talk about that, is going from here to here. So sex is often, so is the diagnosis of an illness that doesn't have a cure, like autoimmunity, which you can reverse, right? And cancer is another one. These are big wake-up calls on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, where it's important to sit back and say, like what I was saying, mine that made me say, gosh, every time I'm upset, I'm present, was the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. So I'd had enough of these sort of quiet little, like a toddler pulling on mom's skirts, pay attention to me from my body. And I just kept running over it. Not now, not now. I'm busy, right? That's not great parenting for the body. And so if we can kind of think about our bodies as small children who are trying to get your attention and, tugging at you, I was the worst. And so, it was rheumatoid arthritis that got me to sit back and start really engaging in the self-inquiry of the realization that, every time I'm not, my expectations haven't been met is when I get upset. It's because of my unmet expectations. Those expectations are set by me. And when I really start tracing them backwards, they came from childhood. Gosh, this might be an outdated set. I might have an operating system that I could upgrade, right? And that requires that willingness to stay awake to your own thoughts. So along the way, when I was doing that, I discovered that part of the series of perceptual filters I put in front of my own lens of viewing the world was sexual abuse when I was 10. And that had informed a lot of how I saw the world and sex itself. And so I knew that this probably had something to do with my RA too. It's a little on the nose to say, libido issues can be related to sexual abuse. It's a little bigger stretch to say it's related to your autoimmune issue. I got it. I got that my hypervigilance of my mind was creating a hypervigilant immune system. And it was creating hypervigilance in my system with my relationship. And so my relationship with myself, my relationship with life, with the divine, I was so hypervigilant. With my body, right? I didn't know if I could trust it. Trust was a big issue. Well, of course it is. It's for a very good reason that someone that has capital T trauma and lowercase t trauma in childhood that had their trust betrayed, they've got plenty of evidence for why they see the world the way they see it. It's not that it's not justified, but that's not helpful, right? Yeah. And so if I'm leading into my life from my 10-year-old version of myself, she can't handle parenting 4 children, medical practice, any of the things that were going on as far as the roles that I had. So every single time a button got pushed for me, that dropped me back into my filters of my 10-year-old self. Of course, I felt overwhelmed and my nervous system would shut everything down and my heart would get guarded. And of course, what is RA? It's inflammation in your joints to support. So everything would be rigid. So these rigidly held, hypervigilant, watchful places, right? So when I work with people, I often work with what's now called internal family systems. He definitely didn't start this way of thinking about things, but it's energy systems that are each one has that are different from one another, but we all have a way that we protect ourselves and a judge that's weighing in on things all the time. And that's part of that false self. And so you get to start witnessing that and integrating those with compassion, letting them know they're not necessary 100% of the day anymore, and letting your true nature lead with compassionate wisdom. And that is one thought at a time. And that leads to a libido level, which means life force vitality, that's thriving, flourishing, luster of the skin, right? An immune system that's not being told by the perceptions, not the brain. Everyone always wants to go to brain. We put neuro on the front of everything and it's super sexy, which is true. The brain's very sexy. But it is not the brain that activates this. It is the mind, which is your perceptions, then activate the part of the brain that tells the body what to do next. So you pull something out of long-term storage in your hypothalamus, look at it, go, uh-oh, this is similar. That's not okay, right? Pituitary gets triggered into letting the adrenals know, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, fight, flight, freeze, or faint. Cortisol gets released in the system over perpetuity. That breaks down the gut lining. The immune system weighs in because all this food's being seen on the outside of the system that's not supposed to be there. And a lot of us are scurrying around looking for how to take care of it in that very downstream place without working on what's activating it in the first place. Even in trauma healing circles now, there's a lot of emphasis on limbic system retraining, rewiring, remapping the brain. That's still not doing it. So this is where, I always say when I give talks about functional sexology to doctors from stages, one of the things I'll say is you have to quit telling your patients to reduce their stress. That's ridiculous. If they have a special needs child or an elderly parent that they're caregiving, where you want them to throw them away, reduce them. It's really changing your relationship with your stress. That's perception. So that's really important, to just a tiny little shift right there, right? Stress reduction, that doesn't make any sense. Stop drinking coffee because you're tired. That makes sense, right? Yeah. Stop drinking alcohol to put yourself to sleep. That makes sense. That's going to harm all your systems. But at the end of the day, it's up here, right? See, what are these perceptions? What are these little thought bubbles? And learning to become what we call awake awareness, like always awake and aware to your own thoughts. And then recognizing and being willing to question. I think this thought came from my newborn self. In the story of my birth, this happened, da, 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 da. You don't keep you doing that in a cerebral way, but you can recognize it. And then you go do some attachment work with your own self. That's another thing I do with people, is learning how to attach to all the ages and stages of themselves that went through heartbreak, betrayal, and trauma, and learning how to love those little ones in there. Well, guess what happens when you securely attach and you bring that little one into your heart and you keep them safe and you don't have them leading in your life? Sexual health improves, because now you don't have a traumatized 5-year-old in bed or a 10-year-old in the vice principal's office being sexually abused. That doesn't make for a good sex life. Yeah. So you want to start becoming aware of all of this, these parts of you and healing them. It's really beautiful. And the thing of it is in my book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, I have this graphic that I just love. And it's a dog chasing its tail, Tail, right? And then I have a brain chasing its spinal cord to represent the mind chasing its Tale. And that when a dog's chasing his tail and you're watching that, you laugh because you're never catching that. Well, that's the same thing with us. We get on these ruminating thought loops, now called the default mode network. And anytime you're not focused on an actual process, a job, a problem to solve, work, and you're just left to rest in your mind, you'll notice your default mode network goes immediately to I, me, my, mine, right? It's the mantra. It's all about you, self-referential. And you're going to start on these little thought loops. And so starting to become aware of what those are made of, which is why I do a lot of like plant medicine journeys with people, because some psychedelics interrupt that default mode network enough that you can create a gap and start witnessing it and then bring lightness to it. You can start chuckling like, oh, there's my favorite mantra. Me, right? Am I safe? Am I okay? Am I lovable? Am I being respected? You know?
Yeah.
So you get to have that with compassion without that little judge chiming in and without a protector dropping in, right, to guard everything. So you start to slowly, this is not something that is a straight line. It's not a light switch where there is either it's on or it's off, this healing process, right? It's very messy. And by realizing, that we can start having some patience and some grace for it, and recognizing that our sexual lives are just a reflection, just like the immune system is a reflection of the mind. So our sexual lives, our financial well-being, also a reflection, our quality of our relationships, right? A reflection. These are externalized ways of noticing what's the patterning we have in our own mind that actually we co-create with the universe for lessons for us to learn.
I want to stop as the steward of this precious thing you're creating for us. And I don't have much to share today because what you're sharing is so important and I want to get every minute. But for our audience, I want to do a couple of things. First, I just want to honor your courage and transparency in tying your personal journey into the courage and peace that you're offering to people who can follow you. And I think it's a testament to the power of the process you're describing. And admittedly, that's an assumption. I don't know what it's like to be you, obviously. Nonetheless, there's a remarkable courage and transparency there that I think creates a space for other people to have courage and transparency. I should know that the reason a lot of the people I take care of and the reason I was reluctant to take steps in my own healing path is this feeling of, and you've illuminated this for us before too, but this feeling of the lily pad I'm on isn't the greatest, but it could be even worse if I hop to a lily pad that sinks. There's this sort of safety principle. And so for our audience, I'd like them, one of the takeaways I'd like from today is for them to reflect on where you're going to via Dr. Keesha's approach is safer than where you are. That's one of the operative principles, to invoke Dr. Heidi Hanna's phrase. We're wired for safety, and where you're going is safer than where you are. And I think that's really important because so many of the people that I take care of, that fear takes them into freeze faint and sort of a lock up mode. And then just briefly, I wanted to share that when we change, and for me, and I've shared this before in our conversations, part of what's precious to me is that it's safe to talk with you about a high burden of shame and a low self-esteem as a young person that was decades of work to illuminate via these principles that you outlined. To me, it was like mountaineering. It was like waking up early in the morning, high on a mountain with a snow field, and then the sun comes up, and there's this period of hours during which it's safe to move across that snow field and get to the next ridge, the next rocky safe place. But as the sun warms that snow, rocks start tumbling down and things start sliding and destabilizing. And I do think there's an aspect of change where we're more vulnerable because we don't have our old kit and we're building our new kit. And that's an important time to keep moving. Or in this lily pad analogy, when it looks like that new lily pad is safe, go ahead and hop. Because that part of our heart that says, do it, go, grow, this operating system can transform the self. My answer is yes, because it's been illuminated by people like Dr. Keesha. You can read her books and do her programs and learn more about something that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, nobody had pulled this together in a contemporary fashion for somebody with a contemporary consciousness to move in the fashion that you've described.
What you just said about keep moving, Winston Churchill also said something similar, like when you're in the middle of hell, don't sit down. Right?
Sounds like Winston Churchill.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think about, Suzanne Cook-Gruder, the psychologist who did some research out of Harvard in the 70s on adult stages of ego development. Ken Wilber's used it, Spiral Dynamics uses it. It's not widely known inside of our culture that we actually, as adults, have developmental milestones to hit. We know our children have them, can walk at a certain age, talk, tie shoes, play well with others. We don't have that lined up so neatly. Erickson, in fact, kind of glossed over adulthood. It's like you get to middle age and then you get to the old age of generativity versus regret, and then you're gone. This actually gives you this nice, so you can look up Spiral Dynamics or Suzanne Cook-Gruder. But one of the things that I took from her work was, just like if you've ever watched a chick peck from the inside of a shell and then open the shell as it's hatched, it's covered in slime, it's exhausted, and it just sort of lies down and breathes shallowly and pants, and some of them die and some of them make it. And then it gets up and it's like a chick, right? And a butterfly will do the same thing as it moves out of its cocoon. Takes about an hour of this, sitting in the sun and working the wings to strengthen them and dry them from all the slime to be able to then take flight into its next metamorphosis. I view each movement from one stage of development to the next in that same way. It's exhausting. And so if you feel overwhelmed and you feel exhausted, it's supposed to be that way. That's actually supposed to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And as you take one step and put it in front of the other with this new way of being in your mind, then it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And you'll feel very free of that last stage of development for some time. And then you'll get called to the next one and you'll do it again. And it'll be exhausting. This is why you can't go occupy old shells that have already been recycled into deposits in the soil. You can't go find those. Mm-hmm. And so this is a really important thing that you're saying, hopping from one lily pad to the next. If you miss the lily pad and you go in the water, you do have legs. You can swim, and
you're a frog.
You're a frog. So
another note to self moment. Oh,
right. Use your innate, right?
Yeah.
Divine given talents and skills, and you'll get back up on the next one, right? It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. And so that's something I think that I call it mouse to eagle. When we're mice, we're children, we're scurrying around on the forest floor. There's a lot that can kill us, right? Children, we go into freeze state a lot, and there's a lot that's predatorial in a child's world, and we go from, one place to the next. When you move into your adult developmental levels, you're more of an eagle, and you can fly over the forest. You can see the forest floor. You can see the little mice. You have a bigger, broader vision, and you have power, and you can catch a current, and you can glide, and you can actually have fun. So if you stay trapped in a mouse's body as an adult, you don't get that opportunity and that experience. So it's just very beautiful, this process of growing, but it isn't painless, and it is exhausting, but that's temporary. So that's what I would leave, because sexuality, like in my research, I divided low libido in men and women into two categories. One is innate and one is acquired. Innate low libido means you haven't had any kind of like drive sexually, and then you can translate that in the way I've been translating it also for your whole life, even for self-pleasuring when you're a teenager. Acquired low libido is when you have a great relationship with the partners that you are with, partner or partners, and sex is fun for you. You have a great drive in the world, mission and purpose, and you go through menopause or andropause. And then all of a sudden for a woman, it's like you have cut glass in your vagina. That's actually a very clear need for hormones, right? And so there's not a story or a narrative in there that triggered this or has just been present for you with you the whole time. So innate low libido is usually from a mental issue like OCD, anxiety, depression, and trauma. Those are the reasons. The low, so it could be sexual abuse, but it could also be heartbreak, betrayal, and trauma. And you have a very strong protector, a defense mechanism. You're not aware of how you're working in the world. And so that can be healed. So this way of categorizing it, I think, is very important. And just instead of just saying, I have low sex drive. And then it's the same with painful intercourse. Have you always had that? Is it a result of menopause? Erectile dysfunction for men, is it a result of andropause? Has it always been an issue? So we definitely have circulatory system issues that can come up for men and women, and in that physical aspect that we need to get to root cause. Absolutely. Don't leave out the part of mind that generates what's going on in the body. And so this is a big piece of, going to root cause includes 5 different places. You look at the story, I call it the libido story, libido map, where along the way did you come to understand yourself as a sexual or non-sexual being? So where's the wounding? The next one is body. Like, are you on medications? Do you have a diagnosis? Have you had cancer, chemo, surgery, radiation? Is there interference in that way from a physical aspect? Have you burned out your adrenals because you're a CrossFit, person who has a goal in their mind about how their body should be, but isn't asking the body and bringing it along? Or are you sedentary? So it's not working in collaboration with the body, right? The second one is going to be emotional. Is there an emotional wounding place in there where there's always a question, am I going to get hurt? Or this person is going to hurt me, or I'm in a violent relationship and I have been hurt and I'm not safe. Mental, and this is going to often be like, I'm overweight, I'm underweight, I've got scars, I have stretch marks, I have whatever it is, performance anxiety. And spiritual. So spiritual is a big one. Sex is wound up with so much shame in different cultures, not just ours. So from the pulpit, often children are told that desire is a sin and you have to wait until you get married. And so then if you're sinful, if you have desire and then you get married and you're expected to just turn on the faucet and the spigot will flow freely, that doesn't work. And so there's often a place in there where good girls don't. That's where we create the Madonna whore complex that often men are involved in. Like they really want their wife to be pure, like Mother Mary or a goddess, and then they're attracted to a different way. And so there's a duality and a schism that will be created, and again, perception, right? That's created in a spiritual context or lack of. So all of that is explored. And when we're talking about this, I don't know, do I have time to share a story?
Oh, absolutely.
So I have a friend who's a fellow researcher in the world of sexology. She's a sex therapist, and her name is Tina Sherman Sellers. And she worked for a long time at a Protestant college as a therapist and teaching sex therapy to therapists. And she started, and I believe a colleague of hers started searching in the Bible for sex positive stories. And you can find them in the Old Testament, you know, with the Song of Solomon and David, right? And they're woven throughout, but it's usually in the Old Testament and in this very poetic, very beautiful way. And then going into the Torah, they found actually this really amazing story where in Jerusalem, in the Temple of Solomon, in the Holy of Holies, the rabbis were in prayer, and they had noticed that the citizens of, you know, Jerusalem had gotten to be quite wicked in the way that they thought about how they were using their sexual energy. And a lot of the commandments were being broken, which are different than, you know, the way that, well, anyway, so a lot of commandments were being broken. And so they said, they were praying and they were saying, Jehovah, can you just take away this energy? We don't want it anymore. Please, God, just take it away, take it away. And so God appeared in the Holy of Holies and said, are you sure? And they said, yes, 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 yes. Thank you for listening, you know. And so the rabbis witnessed this lion of fire, it was made out of fire, rise up and go over the wall of the temple and off into the desert. And so they were like, oh, good. You know, the people are protected now, and there will be no more sinning. And so over a month that started to ensue after that event, chickens stopped laying eggs, milk stopped making milk, or cows stopped making milk. You know, all of the animals, the livestock stopped reproducing. Artists put down their tools. They were not creative anymore. You know, all the obvious things that this energy is used for went away. There was no more building, no more laughing. And so about a month later, music had died. You know, there was nothing. They went back into the Holy of Holies and they said, oh, God, please, can you come back to us, you know? And then when he appeared, they said, so can we get this back like at 50%? Just a little bit. God said, no, like this is the co-creative energy with me. And this is my creative energy that works and flows through you. It is up to each one of you to use it responsibly. And so they said, all right. And so it came back. And so that, you know, to me, that's that yellow brick road of we're going from innocence to wisdom, and we're tripping a lot as we go until we start learning about ourselves in the world. And, you know, and that's staying awake and aware to our own thoughts until we are wise ones. And it is up to us to do that responsibly and with that compassionate curiosity and, you know, that collective ability and desire to self-confront instead of constantly monitoring what everybody else is doing. worrying about your expectations not being met by God, the world, the government, the president, the neighbor, the spouse, the children, parents, all of that. And you just, focus right here. I remember the day that I noticed I wasn't as judgmental as I had been when I was younger. And I realized it was because there was so much to work on right here. I just didn't need to be looking out here anymore.
Yeah.
It's very freeing,
Yes. Yes.
This
it
right here
is.
is a full-time job. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been my experience also, is when we realize our response to ourselves in the world is ours.
Yeah.
It's sobering, and it really stands out in stark contrast to whatever we've been doing prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's liberating.
Mm-hmm. Very.
So what a beautiful story you just shared. That is just so cool. And it's so cool that you and the folks that you collaborate with are illuminating spiritual traditions, having ancient wisdom that's informative of this. I think today, more so than in general, a bunch of the folks
Yes.
that hear this are going to want to know ways to benefit from your wisdom. So do they read your book? Do they go to one of your retreats? Do they do one of your online programs? All of the above. What's the menu of what's available through Dr. Keesha for people that want to act on this?
In the category of what we've been talking about today, I have a program called the Libido Cure on my website that you can do with your partner, and it's pre-recorded just in the comfort of your own home. My book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, deals with the freedom framework, which is I touched on it without naming it that. And I do work with people one-to-one, and I do host retreats, and just kind of depends on what you're called to. A lot of my patients, and I would warrant this is true for you also, arrive at my shores, so to speak, frustrated with sometimes functional medicine, and because they've spent thousands of dollars on supplements and protocols and diets and are not better. And the compassionate piece of light I shine into that is that frustration, that anger only makes things worse. And everything you learned in that process is not wasted. You have learned something about your own process. And sometimes after they hear me, they go, oh, I haven't done the trauma part. So you haven't wasted anything. You just haven't addressed this next part. And so coming to it from that place of, oh, I'm moving along and opening and expanding, into a new shell, a new layer. And I don't need to hold anger towards the medical complex, to functional medicine practitioners, all of that I see a lot. And just, bring yourself with compassion into, I think this is the next thing that I would love to give myself, is this freedom from the way my own mind does anger, libido, flexibility of the pelvis, the vagina, and the penis and the immune system are all in Ayurvedic medicine a result of what they call undigested anger. So really noticing, like, where are you frustrated, irritated, and angry, and that you're going to be able to bring that to any experience of your life, and it will create the same outcomes. And so you can come on to drkeesha.com, and I have a lot of videos and classes and things like that there, or I'd love to work with anyone that is in that place where they're called to say, this is it. This is what I haven't been doing yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about the value of laughter, and I forgot to share my anecdote at the beginning of the podcast, but maybe it's better at the end. So in addition to all of your wonderful qualities, you're willing to help somebody like me get into this space And so somebody we both know created an opportunity for me to interview you for my first ever Seaworthy podcast. It will be episode 0 or episode -1 because it never made it. And that was 4 years ago or something like that. And so here you are, so gracious to create the time. And I've been putting together my kit. For my audience, there is a point to this anecdote. So I'm in the downstairs of my home with an iPad and some earbuds in and a shop light and not enough bandwidth. And you show up and I try to create this space then 4 years ago to do what you did so beautifully today. And I couldn't create the space. I was pixelated. The audio couldn't hold up. I looked like I was in the, there were no pixels where all the light was blowing everything out. And you were so gracious. You said, this is fine. We can do this another time. But then later I realized it wasn't just the tech. I couldn't create the space for this conversation. And so also for everybody that thinks, oh, I really know this is where a bunch of my healing is, but I just can't go there. It's okay that there were a number of meaningful no's before a meaningful yes. That's okay. You can swim, and this neat energy shows up to support you when you take this step. So it's okay.
That's so beautiful. Yes.
Well, have just a terrific day, Dr. Keesha, and this is a great moment for me. I feel a sense of completeness just in being in a place in my life where I can create a space for you to share what you shared. So thanks a million.
Oh, thank you. It's always such an honor to be invited to do this, and what a lovely space you've created. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks for joining us for the Seaworthy podcast. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. If you think we've earned it, please consider giving this podcast a like, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. Thanks.